Welcome to the Investor Download, the podcast about the themes driving markets and the economy now and in the future. I'm your host, David Brett. Hello, welcome everyone. It's been an interesting couple of years for renewable investors. In 2022, US renewable energy growth slackened its pace, according to Deloitte, citing a host of issues from rising costs to supply chain disruption, trade policy uncertainty, and everything in between, with some predicting those problems might dog the sector for the next 18 months. However, demand is growing and investment is soaring. Clean energy investment significantly accelerated and expected to surpass $1.4 trillion in 2022. That's according to the World Economic Forum. So those interested in investing in renewables, that feels like a confusing picture. Slowing renewable energy growth versus rising demand and soaring investment. So what is actually the state of play? What are the challenges and the key investment themes over the next 18 months? With me today to discuss this is David Boyce, CEO of Schroders Greencoat North America. David, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I just want to start with, obviously that seems like a little bit of a confusing picture. You've got the slowing renewable energy growth versus rising demand. How do those two marry up? What's the state of play at the moment in the renewable energy market?
Well, in the U.S., I think with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act,
President Biden has signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law.
President Biden interrupted his summer vacation to sign the massive climate, health, and tax bill at the White House this afternoon.
Today offers further proof that the soul of America is vibrant, the future of America is bright, and the promise of America is real and just beginning.
This does it makes big investments in combating climate change, in transforming the sort of way we rely on energy and investing in renewable technologies through tax credits and other means.
And continued demand for cost-effective power, which really is where renewables are in the States now. We're seeing an awful lot of activity. And I think that in 2023 and beyond, we're going to see that kind of continued march forward as we have more renewables build out. Now, that's all not to say, and to your point, are there headwinds to that? And I think there are. And I think you brought up a few having to do with supply chain management. There's been disruptions, slowdown.
One of the busiest cargo gateways in the country, the Port of Los Angeles, is once again seeing bottlenecks that could disrupt the supply chain to businesses and consumers nationwide.
Some of the costs of the raw materials like copper and steel have gone up, putting pressure on these projects.
Strong global demand for steel has caused prices to soar.
Prashant, if you have to look at any sign or signal of demand growth or no recession coming in, then copper is your place to be. And we've seen positive cues coming in for this one. Last week, it was trading 8% on the higher side. We've opened the trade in the positive right now as well. So the copper prices are trading at a 3-week highs right now.
But I do think that we're a little bit winding out of most of the problems, and a lot of those unique to the pandemic. And I think, but that said, there are a lot of demand for certain components, like transformers, where the lead time for taking delivery of those after you order, is quite long by historical standards. So, listen, I think certain issues are working through. I think the market will adjust.
Is there any danger that we might slip back towards more reliance on fossil fuels, or have we passed that moment?
Well, I think in the U.S., you're going to have, I think fossil fuels for the foreseeable future are at least going to be part of the picture. What renewables are going to do, they're going to continue to kind of replace, the energy component of our power supply. It's very cost-effective energy, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of build-out. So that's going to continue to take an ever greater portion of the supply stack. But that's not to say that you can readily see when we won't need fossil fuels as well in the U.S.
How do you see the US market changing or growing in the future?
Well, I think it's going to continue to evolve. Wind and solar provide very cost-effective power to the grid, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of momentum there. And I don't see that dissipating anytime soon. I think that the next matter to tackle is providing capacity, or the ability to call on power when you need it, in order to kind of balance the variability of renewables. And that's kind of, I think, going to be the next wave that we're going to see in the US. And it's unclear, storage plays a part of that. I think hydrogen could play a part in that. Possibly nuclear could play a part in that. So it'll be, that's really up for grabs. And there's a lot of people trying to solve that problem in a lot of different ways.
That sounds like a lot of money might need investing in infrastructure.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just a tremendously capital-intensive business. What we're seeing now from a lot of the renewables developers, particularly the larger ones, where they have massive build programs year over year, I mean, it's just devouring capital, and they're really looking to recycle some of that capital, back into their development business to keep the whole thing moving forward. I think it's providing opportunity for investors, to kind of invest more directly in our renewable fleet, and kind of attached to what's going on, attached to a part of what's going on. I would say probably, as you look at the variety of investment opportunities, I think it is probably more on the kind of, I don't want to say lower risk, lower return, but I mean more on the core side of the investment spectrum.
On Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, you're listening to the Investor Download.
It sounds like quite a pretty major transformation in the way that energy will be both used and sourced. I mean, who are the key players in that energy transformation?
Well, certainly it's the development market, right? They're trying to find ways and places to put new resources. I think it's the load serving entities, which utilities, co-ops, municipals. It's really a transition for them, adding more renewables to their fleet. But then there's also just kind of the framework in which everybody is operating, and that includes the transmission grid operators, how fast the transmission grid builds out to accommodate the new power generation. It's how the industry can continue to work with stakeholders like U.S. Fish and Wildlife, so that we're doing, all this development's getting done responsibly. And then it does take some leadership kind of at the federal level, to allow for more renewables to be built. And I think with the Inflation Reduction Act, I think that's a massive signal generally to the industry and to the U.S. population that there's support from the federal government level for more renewables build out.
Yeah, I was going to move on to regulations. Actually, obviously, you've got the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a pretty, well, from what I hear, is quite a big game changer for the industry. But how's that filtering down, like to the state level and the local level? Is it all working smoothly, or are there lots of hurdles to overcome?
Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act, although it's getting a lot of press and it is important, it's an important signal. It's a long-term kind of subsidy. It really, at its core, is just extending the same federal support that we've had in the industry for the past 20 years. So in many ways, it's not, groundbreaking or massively different, but it does keep the momentum going for renewables. Now, at the state and local level, I think there are some different dynamics at play. And I think maybe you'd be surprised to hear it, but a lot of these renewables are going into red states, which are more conservative states. It's fairly interesting that one of the states with the largest renewables build out is Texas.
In a state known for its oil industry, there's a different source of energy that's kicked into high gear. Towering wind farms and solar fields stretching as far as the eye can see are popping up throughout Texas, now a hotbed for renewables.
And I think probably even if you're not in the U.S., you recognize Texas as being pretty vocally anti-renewables, when in fact, there's times of the day where I believe the entire state of Texas is running on renewables these days. But the reality is that renewables does have pretty broad-based support in the U.S. A lot of the build-out is happening in those same red states, and that provides, investment in the state, property tax base. It provides jobs to those states. And so we're seeing it kind of universally being supported, for economic reasons. Now, that's not to say that there aren't also headwinds, particularly at the local level.
Some Texas senators unveiled plans today to shift the focus away from wind and solar and toward resources like natural gas, all part of 9 bills Texas lawmakers announced.
Opposition groups, particularly those in areas near urban areas, or even areas in the Midwest where you have very fertile farmland. There's opposition, and a lot of that opposition is around, the visual effects, or even just the conversion of farmland into what some view as a fairly industrial use. It's not all roses across the industry. There certainly are some headwinds, at different levels of government.
And do you think any of that attitude or what's happening on the ground might change depending on who gets in the White House and which party controls the White House and Congress when the elections happen next year?
It's obviously always hard to say, but we can simply just point to when President Trump was elected, and he's fairly vocally anti-wind.
I never understood wind. I know windmills very much. I've studied it better than anybody. I know it's very expensive.
Kind of pro-fossil, in particular pro-coal.
And I know this doesn't matter to you, but we are putting our great coal miners back to work.
And I think people in the renewables industry were really afraid that the U.S. was going to move, do an about face and move away from renewables. And what actually happened during his tenure there is that the build out continued. In fact, I think we had some record years of renewables build out while he was president. We didn't see any retreat from any of the federal support. And in fact, I think during his tenure, there might have been 1 or 2 extensions of some of the deadlines for renewables build out. And so, we didn't see obviously any huge legislative moves, towards renewables, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. However, we also didn't see kind of a retreat away. So what happens in the next administration? The Inflation Reduction Act is there. It's got a long life. And I think depending on what party gets in, you may see some differences around the edges, around supporting or really ignoring the renewables industry. But I don't think it's going to have kind of a fundamental. It's not going to fundamentally shift the industry. Propel it forward faster than it's going, or do a 180 and just tear down the industry. I just don't see that.
How does this all compare to what's going on in Europe? We're always told that Europe are sort of the leaders in this energy transformation. How do you see it from your side of things?
Well, it's absolutely true that in Europe, They were ahead of the U.S. in terms of renewables build-out.
The new president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has vowed to put climate at the heart of her presidency. She's been presenting her promised Green Deal in Brussels. The plan will commit the EU to achieving climate neutrality by 2050.
The European Union says it wants to stop using Russian fossil fuels by 2027, and it's just unveiled a €210 billion plan to do exactly that.
A subsidy race is brewing between Europe and the United States over green investments. The European Commission has released a plan to make the EU a centre for clean technology.
They've been leading the whole way through in terms of renewables penetration. Take offshore wind as a case in point. You've had offshore wind for many years and a pretty substantial offshore wind industry in Europe. And we probably really won't see any type of material build out in the US off the east and west coasts until 2026, 2027. So there's no doubt about it. Europe is kind of more advanced and a bit ahead of where the US is on the overall. It's interesting. I mean, in Europe, you see more of a drive to kind of a net zero concept, and it propels renewables. It propels a lot of things that gets us to kind of a zero carbon environment. And I think that there's a lot of popular support to move in that direction and to kind of push the boundaries. The U.S. politically, obviously, as we talked about, isn't in that mode. I think there's certainly a contingent of the U.S. that feels very similarly to Europe, but there's also a fair amount of skepticism that you see, and a lot of conservatism, and so we seem to be moving a little bit slower, moving a little bit. Letting some of the fundamentals of power generation take hold. And by that I mean, if you look at renewables today, it's very cost competitive with fossil, right? So whether you believe in a green agenda or a move to more carbon-free environment or not, the reality is you're putting renewables in today just because it simply makes economic sense. And so, there's different motivations depending on where you're at. And I think the U.S. is much more, has a wider spectrum of kind of thoughts about how we move forward with renewables and towards kind of a net zero environment.
Get in touch with us by email at schroderspodcasts@schroders.com or visit our website, schroders.com/the investor download.
So there's obviously massive momentum behind this. I mean, a lot of investors will be wondering how renewable investments do drive investment returns. So from your perspective, how does that work? Because I think a lot of people still consider it almost an investment with their conscience rather than thinking of actual returns. So how do renewable investments drive returns?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely the case, is that it's been painted that way. But I would say that, to be honest with you, the reason I'm with Schroders Greencoat right now, and the reason I'm in this business, is because I really think over the past few years, we've made the renewables market has changed and changed in this regard. And I touched on it already, which is if you look at the effective cost of power coming from solar and wind over the past decade, those are more cost-effective sources of power than they ever have been before. And in fact, power produced from those sources today readily competes with the variable costs of fossil fuels. And, that kind of fundamental truth, if you will, is really driving a lot of what's happening in this industry in the States. And that has nothing to do with greening up the world at all. You're not subsidizing or paying a higher power price just to have green on your system. it kind of naturally fits. And that's really why there's all this activity, and the people who serve load, it's an absolute no-brainer to add more of this to their system, because, it provides cheap power to their, to their ratepayers. So, it's just right now, it's part of our generation mix. It's not novel. It's not kind of a nice to have. It's nothing of the sort. It's, if you were interested in investing in the power supply generally in the US, you might buy a natural gas plant, but you might also just buy a wind or solar plant. It's just naturally kind of part of our generation mix right now. And that fundamental, I think, is really exciting. I've been in US power gen for the better part of 30 years. And, that wasn't always the case. And the reason Renewable somewhat has the reputation it does, as, I have to have an extra motive to make that investment, because it doesn't kind of naturally fit. I think we've really turned a corner. I mean, it's really time to kind of reassess that viewpoint, because, now the fundamentals are there. And I think it's a wonderful place to invest, just in the US, power generation supply. And then it just got on top of it, it's just got all of the, the kind of the bonuses in terms of being environmentally friendly, taking carbon out of the atmosphere. I mean, those are almost cherries on top of the sundae at this point.
David Boyce, CEO for Schroders Greencoat North America. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been fabulous. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was the show. We very much hope you enjoyed it. If you want to find out more, check out our website, schroders.com/the investor download. You can also get in contact with us about anything in the show or ideas for future shows at schroderspodcast@schroders.com. Please remember to subscribe to us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to leave a review. We're now doing one show a week, which will be available every Thursday from 5 p.m. UK time. Thanks very much for listening, but above all, keep safe and go well. Cheers.
The value of investments and the income from them may go down as well as up, and investors may not get back the amounts originally invested. Past performance is not a guide to future performance. The information is not an offer, solicitation, or recommendation of any funds, services, or products, or to adopt any investment strategy.